Hello and welcome. My name is John Ryan. I'm with Broadsheet, and you're very welcome to fifth in a series of programs on the Mother and Baby Homes Commission of Investigation final report, which was published on Tuesday this week. Um, it's now Thursday, and I'm joined by adoptee and activist Eunan Duffy. Hello, Eunan, and
Hi,
Breeda
John.
Murphy um, of the Tuam Mother and Baby Home Alliance. And it's been quite a week for both of you in terms of you've had to do a lot of radio interviews. Can I go to either one of you choose now to take up from Tuesday morning, if you could? Maybe Breeda, if you would like to start.
Tuesday morning began very early for us, John. I was up at around 6:15, and I decided very early in the morning that we had waited almost 6 years for the report, which was going to be released that day. So I decided that we would write to our members and ask to light a candle on the day. And I lit a candle here, took a picture, did the WhatsApp. So throughout the day, throughout the morning, the various radio stations were phoning, and then of course the report was released, and it should have been a joyous occasion, I think, or one, well, perhaps not joyous is the word, but you know, it's the culmination of 6 years of hard work and 4 delays and you know, constant pressure to keep on government and the church. So we were, I suppose it's a bittersweet moment. And that moment came and we thought, well, we have the report, but we're continuing today to devote Tuesday and Wednesday to the mothers and children who didn't make it through, either from the mother and baby homes or in the interim. And of course, our survivors born between 1925 and 1961, many are deceased and many never got to tell their story. So, you know, there were times when I broke down on radio because it's an overwhelming feeling that, you know, you come to the stage where you think we've won, we've got justice, and we didn't have the report. But we listened to the apology the following day, and while the apology is welcome, looking through the report, which came today well, not the entire report, but the 200 pages, which came in the post today, and which I looked at. There are many inconsistencies and much that we have to argue and get the evidence for how they come to various conclusions.
Eunan, can you describe your Tuesday?
I'm inherently skeptical, John. To be honest, and I've learned that over the years. Maybe that's part of an adoptee trait as well, given our sort of life circumstances. I don't know, but certainly some of our skepticisms and cynicism has been borne out basically in what the report has produced. And it's actually gone further than dampening down people's hopes. It's really been an exercise in rubbing coarse salt in open wounds, to be quite honest, because some of the narrative, the
Breeda, can you
statements, absolute statements up and made on it, you know what I mean, in terms of etc. You know, there again lies a problem in terms of what they define as gross abuse. You know what I mean? Because certainly in terms of adopted people, and they would tell you that early separation from a birth mother is one of the most heinous sort of crimes and abuses that you could possibly think of, because it has lifelong detrimental effects. You know what I mean? No matter what way you look at it, and everybody is obviously going to react in a different way, but it can't fail to affect you in some way, and that goes for the birth mother as well, obviously.
Yeah, Breeda, what was the biggest disappointment?
Sorry?
What is the biggest disappointment of the last couple of days in terms of the report?
The biggest
also in terms of the
disappointment.
apology?
Yeah, biggest disappointment for me is that there is obvious abuse, neglect, and some of the children who entered the mother and baby home as pregnant 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds up to the age of 18, there were almost 6,000. And we know that they did not consent. You know, an 11-year-old child, 12-year-old child, and nobody was held to account for that. There are testimonies that, you know, I can read that are in the report to you that will confirm that. You know, it's just that it appears that it's poverty. You know, it was the fact that these girls, women had no voice, and the decisions were made for them by primarily the state and the church. Their families had little or no choice. There was nowhere else for them to go. And the one thing I have said continuously for 6 years, more than 6 years since I got involved in this, is that when I would speak on local radio, be it Midwest, Tip FM, Galway Bay FM, I always said, reaching out to them, you did nothing wrong. And if you remember the apology by Taoiseach Micheál Martin, he has said continuously again, he has said he's picked up those words because those words are true and nobody can dispute them. But then you look to the Commission's report and, you know, it seems not to be strong enough. Here is a first-hand account from a woman who was raped at the age of 12 by a family member and became pregnant. She was sent to the mother and baby home. She said, I was washing the floor, I had pains, I was told I was having a baby. My waters broke, I thought I'd spilt something on, or I'd wet myself. I was brought into a room and I was put in a bed. There was a clear glass door. I was screaming in pain. I got out of the bed because I was in so much pain, but I was told to get back in. The baby was born. The nun told me to give the baby a name, and I did. My baby died. I never told what happened. I was never told. I was told I was going home and that I wasn't to talk about it anymore. My mother told me my baby was dead, and I didn't know anything after that. It seems that, you know, it was completely ignored, and Senator Cromwell spoke about this in the Shannon when the sealing of records was going through Dáil and Shannon Éireann. He spoke about the community knowing and of a young, not a 12-year-old, but maybe an 18-year-old, 20-year-old girl who became pregnant and who went away for a period of time and was missing for that period. And then upon return, nobody spoke about her absence or the fact that she may have given birth to a child and that child wasn't to be seen. And one thing that really disturbs me about all of it is that I grew up in the 1960s and 70s, and I know the vibrancy and the vivaciousness and the beauty and of these women. And I know that they were incarcerated for something, you know, that was really not their fault in all of the occasions. And they were hidden behind high walls. And if it was in County Galway and they were incarcerated in the Tuam home and they were there having had a second child, it's highly likely they never again got out of any institution because they left Tuam for the Magdalen Laundry. And within months of taking over in the Bon Secours in 1925 in Tuam, they were already routing women to the Magdalen Laundry and holding that over the women that were continuously there, so that they had to obey the regime that was in place. Highly structured.
Yeah. Eunan, as an adoptee, how does the report on first reading, did you feel in any way a sense of relief or a sense that the truth is coming out?
Absolutely not, John. There's so many disparities, so many contradictions in the report as well, around a whole range of issues. Basically, bears up all of the research that people like myself and Breeda and academics and journalists like Conal O'Flaherty have all exposed over the last 10, 12, 14 years. For adoptees, obviously, there's issues around the foreign adoptions, and they've been played down. I think it's around 1,600 foreign adoptions that took place over the time period. I mean, these things just don't touch the sides, you know what I mean, in terms of scale. But I think in terms of context, everybody has to realise that basically that this was a sampling exercise carried out like many other investigations before. And some of us would argue that some of the institutions that were actually included in the Commission's report would point to the fact that they were doing the best to downplay some of the abuses and the crimes that have actually taken place. Because, for example, the likes of the castle in Newton Cunningham, that was really only in place from 1982 to 2006, very, very small scale. And because it had came into establishment at that time, things hadn't got totally better, recovered. There was resolutions to the way mother and baby institutions, but there was literally around 16 or 17 women in there at a time, and they were a lot better looked after, etc., etc. Miss Carr's flatlets and all these sort of places, you know what I mean? They couldn't have picked any smaller institutions. You know, I mean, you consider 18 institutions, 14 mother and baby homes and 4 county homes as a small ratio of maybe 180 institutions. You're talking 10%. So some people have seen outrage, for example, in the death figure of 9,000 plus babies. Mm. But if you scale that up into the number of institutions, you know, you're potentially talking into the region of 80 or 90,000, maybe more, given the very, very high infant mortality rates, because again, that's been played down in the Commission's report as well. They've came across figures where sometimes the infant mortality rates in the mother and baby institutions were maybe double what the national average would be, even for legitimate babies, etc., etc. It's just complete nonsense, you know what I mean? There's a lot of evidence and research out there to say that at different times over different decades, it was like 3, 4, 5 times higher than what it should have been. So that's the very discouraging part of it, because I said on radio today that basically when you start reading this here, and I've really only done probably about 120 pages of it so far, is that you're looking at it and you're going, this is supposed to be an independent investigation with historians and academics and a judge, a member of the judiciary. So you're thinking to yourself, are they going to take a really, really objective view to this here, write this in best possible taste and look after the interests of everybody involved and affected? And you start reading it and you go, and you have to sort of refer back and say, you know, was this somebody in the Vatican Curia, or was this somebody, Irish civil servants, that actually wrote this report? Because, you know, our cynicism would stem from the fact that even though there's an independent judiciary there that's sort of overseeing this, it's the state investigating itself. And that's borne out by who drew up the terms of reference without the consultation and
making it private,
the participation, etc., etc., you know, from the actual victims and survivors themselves. And that's a common theme, you know, that despite every kind of statutory investigation, small scale or large scale, that you've had in the south of Ireland or the north, victims and survivors are the last ones to come to the table, the last ones to be consulted. Everything is set up, you know, when it should be victim survivor led, centered and framed, consultative participant. You know, it just doesn't happen. And we're getting those sort of sound bites from the apology from Micheál Martin. But, you know, even the establishment of this interdepartmental working group, you know, it needs to have that participation, you know, because there's been, for anyone that had any kind of hope and faith and trust in this report, it's been largely just completely diminished and wiped out. So victims and survivors of these issues basically need to be involved herein in terms of recommendations. And the very fact that he said he was going to implement all of the recommendations of the Commission, he's already stating, we're going to implement these recommendations without your input. So therein shows you the mentality and the mindset of these people. You know, so they'll put out all these sound bites, token gestures, empty promises, but in effect, we wait and we wait and see what's going to happen. But given what's already happened, it's like I said, you know, Micheál Martin should be apologising for that report. Never mind the content of the report, to be honest.
Yeah, Breeda, can I ask about the apology itself in terms of, I noticed society was mentioned, you know, this is a moment for us as a society. What did you think of it and what did your members think of it?
I felt it was an exercise in shifting the blame prior to that. And that had been the discussion overnight on Tuesday night, so that on Wednesday morning, they were prepared, you know, to apologise maybe a little more than they would have. Because as Eunan says, often it's sound bites. And you have to remember, they've controlled the narrative for children within institutions from 1922. And primarily they were Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who still holds the reins of power. And one could argue that the Greens are just the cog in the middle. You know, they're caught there and they're holding a portfolio that's significant. And they will be seen as the failure, whereas in fact, the strings are being pulled by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael at cabinet level. So
Breeda,
the apology, I cannot honestly say that the apology is acceptable until such time that our survivors and that survivors right throughout the country and the mothers who gave birth in those homes and the families who are looking for records and looking for their deceased loved ones, until they have all of the supports that they need, we cannot say that any apology is worthwhile or that it's worth anything, because they have failed time and again over this is the sixth report.
Yeah.
And we seem to fail every single time, primarily because what Eunan says there is true. It does not involve, as experts, people who have spent their time in the home. And I know that Eunan is a very strong advocate, being an adoptee himself. He carries a lot of weight. He carries it in Northern Ireland and he carries it here in the South. And testimony to that is the fact that Minister O'Gorman held Zoom calls. I do think that people like Eunan who challenge the narrative as it unfolds, or those sound bites, those are the people that have to be accommodated, because we stand for survivors and for families, and we have some evidence behind us to counter the claims. I was pretty strong on U105 with Frank Mitchell on this. I said, we do not have the capability of investigating ourselves. We've shown it time and again. We can't do it. We need an overseer on that who is from the UN or some external authority that really holds the reins and says to government, pulls them up every time, whether it's delay or whether it's sending out something like they did throughout the third interim report. We did not find abuse and neglect after our survivors had told them of abuse and neglect.
I mean, the report then, I couldn't understand why it had been delayed so long in terms of its content. It didn't seem to have particularly time sensitive. I mean, they obviously just dragged it on as long as they could, really, you know. Do you think people like Catherine Sapone and Roderick O'Gorman are acting in good faith? And do you think they just sort of like find themselves, you know, as you say, sort of being led along? I mean, particularly Catherine Sapone, I'm quite disappointed in her. I mean, she seems to have really done nothing for it since Tuam, apart from write to the Pope, looking for money to bring up, to exhume the bodies.
I think they've been given a poison chalice, John. You know, you know, Roderick O'Gorman particularly is new to politics, and you walk into Dáil Éireann and you're giving a very strong portfolio, one that, you know, I think Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael probably ran from, because they knew that regardless of whether it's children of the past or survivors, and the reports by Jeffrey Shannon that you look at, Conor O'Mahony today speaking about the right to information, the need, there's not a need for any referendum. You know, they have their own advisors speaking about this. So it's quite obvious that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have played this game many times. And they have won, because, as you said, it's dragged out. And what's the reason for dragging it out when, in fact, the report does not appear to deliver? The reason for dragging it out is that the age profile of the people who are affected are born between 1922 and 1998. And Eunan will argue with you that up until 2006, they should be considered, let alone 1973, when they think, you know, nobody should be compensated after 1973.
And the thing is that, so you've got this going on. I mean, that's a cruel policy, but there's no redress for them for years because of these delays as well. I mean, there's no means of redress really. What bodes for them in that department, Breeda or Eunan, in terms of compensation?
Well, part of the problem with that redress is that they've already said that it's only going to be residents who are going to be eligible that were there over 6 months. Yeah. I mean, in what world is that right? You know, because people like myself who were babies in these institutions, you know what I mean, from the very first minute that they came out of the womb, at the end of the day, you know, you become an incarcerate, you know what I mean? And we need to get away from the terminology, even of the fact that it was a resident, you know, because the vast majority of these people at the end of the day, despite what it says in the Commission's report, basically a lot of them turn to these institutions because the women, because they were penniless and they had nowhere to go. I mean, that's just downright insulting, and it's so disparaging. It's so dismissive of the real, true and actual facts of the matters. And the redress scheme, you know what I mean? You're only eligible if you've been there at least 6 months. This is just incredibly cruel, because even law, I'm not sure about the south of Ireland, but in the law in the north, it doesn't recognise your emotional turmoil and your trauma before you're a year old. I mean, it's absolutely incredible the people that dream this stuff up. And certainly when it comes to eligibility will then run out into dissemination. You know what I mean? This commission and the redress scheme would need to be disseminated worldwide, especially to the countries where a lot of the diaspora have went to. The most popular ones, I suppose, Australia and England, Canada and America. You know, because we've already found that every redress scheme known to man, it's kept as in-house as it possibly can be. And it's not spread out word to word. And again, like this report, it's all about minimalism. It's about cost. You know what I mean? Even the report itself, it tells you that they didn't find any evidence, for example, that the owners and the managers of these institutions ran them with any kind of a profit. I mean, this just runs completely contradictory to a lot of evidence that's out there, and it makes you wonder what papers, what records and what files they've been looking at, because even if you take, for example, Conal O'Flaherty, I mean, who's written on so many of these subjects. Patricia Devlin, for example, done a report in November 2016. Patricia Devlin, I think she's working for the Star at the time. She's a dairy girl, but she's working in the South now. And that basically talked about how the Catholic Church doctored books of mother and baby homes to claim cash from the Irish state. And that was all based on a 2012 HSE report that had looked at Tuam and Cork, and the disparities between how the records were kept. Two different types of records, for example, in the discharge of the woman, the geographical discharge, and then the administrative part of it, when it looked at when she actually left. And they found massive disparities between the timescales, and the fact that then the capitation grants, for example, or whatever the case may be in terms of state funding, that the nuns themselves were actually still claiming for a woman and or a child after they had left the institution and sometimes had died. And we have seen the evidence, for example, of death certificates and deaths not being registered for anything from 6 months to a year after a baby, for example, had died. And in that whole time, that interim time, they were still collecting state payments.
It was not mentioned in the report.
No, that's not mentioned in the report, of course. But you know what I mean, that evidence is all out there. That's in the public domain in terms of journalism and what's been put into the media.
Absolutely,
So
no, exactly.
Conal O'Flaherty, for example, and the extensive research that man has done, it doesn't seem to be referenced at any point within this report.
No, they should
and
have
of course, a lot of what he's done basically substantiates in hard evidence based on internal HSE memos and reports, etc., etc. You know, it can't get any clearer than that, John. You know.
No. Breeda, your members then, in terms of compensation, you remember we were talking a couple of weeks ago. You mentioned a possible redress, immediate redress scheme. Is that on the table at all?
John, it's hard to know. They're going to set up an interdepartmental committee, so we'll know following that. But I think, you know, all the time the state is attempting to say this. They've said, for instance, this was not discussed in Dáil Éireann, which seems to suggest that it was happening without their knowledge, when in fact they commissioned reports by the likes of Alice Lister and social workers who gave damning evidence right throughout the 1930s, 1940s. Monsignor Flanagan of Boystown, who had come here in the 1940s, mid-1940s, I think 1946, and he was quite critical of the manner in which children were being treated by Christian Brothers. And every other country in the world, he was the Mother Teresa of the day. He was regarded as being a loving, caring man who had turned the lives of young children, young boys around by setting up various orphanages and reformatory schools, but not like they were in Ireland. So the Irish government, you know, in Dáil Éireann, you know, they just slated him. And he was still determined to come back to Ireland. And it's a sad reality that he died too soon, because I really think he had the capability to make a difference. But they were close to him. So if they were close to listening to a man with such authority, how could a family or a single mother go against the grain and manage to secure any justice within that society? They couldn't in 1973 either, 1984 or 1994 when Annie Murphy was on the Late Late. Yeah. I have such admiration for Annie Murphy because she withstood the amount of criticism. And I think someday we have to really think about the women of Ireland who have made a difference, the likes of Annie Murphy, Patricia Burke-Brogan, the women who worked in the laundry in Galway, Ina McEntee, Anna May Gill. They took the women out to their homes. They secured their safety and their safe passage to the United Kingdom where they lived. So, you know, we just have to honor those, and we also have to remember that they did it against the overarching pressure of church and state. And it was very difficult.
Philomena Lee, how is she this week? Did you get to speak to her, Breeda, or text her or anything like that?
I didn't get to speak to her, but last week, Bill Hughes and Pat Kenny were both speaking on the Philomena Lee film. And as they were speaking about Judi Dench and how wonderful the film was. And then Pat said to Bill Hughes, is Philomena Lee still alive? And Bill Hughes did not know. And I thought, you know, the person who the film is about, and Philomena Lee contributes to everything, herself and her daughter Jane. We met them in Eunan, and myself met them in Shanross Abbey. She has been a voice for survivors. She's been incredible. And she would have contributed to that show.
Yeah.
And instead, you had the national broadcaster not doing their research. I texted in, I wrote in immediately, I rang in, but I didn't get anywhere. And even my email was, unanswered. But of course,
Well, I
this
think,
week,
yeah, if
Philomena was
it was
on the
Pat Kenny
radio.
was News Talk, maybe you rang the wrong. Did you ring the wrong station?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, News Talk. Absolutely. Yeah, News Talk.
Well, any word out from Philomena this week about it? About
Yeah.
the.
Oh, yeah. She has been really upset by it, by the narrative as well. And of course, none of these women are getting any younger. And for all of us, as we age, we think I think this is natural for everybody. You think back to your childhood, but you also think to what difference you can make in life. And she certainly has made a real difference. She's brought the subject to the public domain, but brought it internationally.
Yeah.
And she continues to speak. And I'm so proud of a woman of her stature to have lost her son as she did, to still be able to forgive, because I'm not sure I'd have it in my heart to forgive when the religious orders kept her apart. And that apology from that particular religious order is
I was going to ask about that, the Bon Secours apology and statement. Is that the first one since the...
That's Bon Secours. Bon Secours' apology is sincere, I believe. It is heartfelt, it is fulsome, but the apology from those who ran the Sisters of Jesus and Mary, who ran Shanros Abbey, Besborough and Castle Pollard, that apology, my God, is the most disgusting apology one could read, because it's not an apology. It's blaming absolutely everyone. It's appalling.
Right. Well, I was, and the Bon Secours apology, even though they denied the existence, a little late in the day, I would have thought.
You're talking about Terry Prohn's.
Well, I'm talking about the time since then, really, that they could have sent that out to survivors, or, that they could have made a statement like this long before now,
They could, as could the bishops, but what they have said is that they were waiting for the commission. And that's always a very structured thing, whereby the commission is put in place, all discourse stops, all access to record stops. So you're waiting and waiting. We're waiting 6 years. So they were not going to come out with an apology because it wasn't being demanded. They could have, but they weren't going to. So the state failed there again to elicit a response earlier from the orders.
Eunan, can we talk about the homes in Northern Ireland? I know that because of the report that Michelle O'Neill came out, there's been some talk about this, the homes in Northern Ireland. Could you give us the latest on that, Eunan?
Yeah, well, it's good that they've found a place for the institutions in the north, to be honest, because it's been a massive undertaking trying to get the north put on the map, I suppose, in terms of institutional abuse like this. Obviously, we've seen the whole historical institutional abuse, but the mother and baby Magdalene institutions were excluded from the HIA that delivered its report in 2017. And basically, Anthony Hart in it, even though he done a very, very small scale investigation and found some systemic abuses in the mother and baby institutions, he just basically says it's up to the Northern Ireland Executive to deal with this. So what we've found since is then, and particularly we can point to Sinn Féin in this respect, they have a real partitionist policy, when a 26 sort of 6-county policy on Lou MacDonald rightly has stood up in the Oireachtas on a number of occasions in the last few months. You defended victims and survivors and said that the state has to do X, Y, and Z, the church has to do X, Y, and Z. But in the north, the Sinn Féin has been in bed in terms of governance with the DUP over the last number of years, and it's basically done its very, very utmost best to dismiss, deny, and delay any kind of restitution and acknowledgement, etc., about the mother and baby institutions and the Magdalene laundry. So It goes way back. For example, I was telling news media today that basically scoping exercises were initiated in 2013 into the laundries, and it was superseded by the mother and baby institutions in 2014. And part of those scoping exercises was the commission of Dr. Sean Lucy in Queen's University, who carried out some of the scoping exercises and found all sorts of reasons for further investigation without going into the detail. So what that means is that if you're talking pre-HIA 2009-10 time to where we are now, we could have 3 public inquiries or 3 statutory commissions, and yet we're no further on because the research that was done and handed into government in August 2019 has still not even reached the public, hasn't been published.
Why?
And I mean, we're way beyond words like sham and fiasco and shambles and cover up and whitewash and delay, etc., etc. We're way beyond the realms of talking about things like that, you know. So certainly the last number of years, the way the government has approached this is they're now sitting back and actually watching what's going on in the south of Ireland, which is deeply troubling. And the fact that you were talking about the apologies here, no apology is worth its salt. And for me, an apology is completely illegitimate unless there's positive, direct action taken upon itself on the basis of that. Because otherwise, you know, people are being forced to apologise. The Bon Secours done exactly the same. Bon Secours want to apologise. Why don't they substantiate it and say, listen, we know there's a whole number of people here coming near the twilight of their years. We're going to open up our records and files and tell you about the exit pathways, because the Commission has stated clearly that the exit pathways for Tuam alone, they only seen 20% of the records.
Eunan, thank you so much. We're literally running out of time, but I just want to thank both of you. And we're going to have another show, hopefully, where we can wrap up some of the report. Hopefully, I'll have read it by then, and most of the people will have read it too. Breeda, Eunan, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
For everything tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.